The rain hadn't stopped for hours. It drummed relentlessly on the sagging tin roof of a modest house crouched on the edge of a sleepy South Carolina town. Inside, Ellen Harper moved like a ghost. The quiet was nothing new, she'd grown used to it over the years, but this morning, the silence felt charged, as if the air itself were holding its breath. At 55, Ellen had carved out a life in stillness. Her daughter lived 2 counties away, chasing corporate dreams in Charleston, and Tom, her husband of nearly 30 years, had been gone for almost a decade. A heart attack, swift and merciless, had taken him without warning. The house, once full of his laughter and their shared routines, now creaked and groaned with age, mirroring the weight in her chest. She poured herself a cup of black coffee, her fingers trembling slightly, not from the cold, but from the habitual ache that came from years of quiet grief. As she stepped onto the porch, mug in hand, she told herself it was just another rainy day. But the moment her gaze fell upon the rusted gate at the edge of her gravel driveway, she knew otherwise. There, soaked through and unmoving, stood a dog. Not just any dog. A German shepherd, tall, lean, and regal despite the mud clinging to his fur and the rain soaking his coat. His amber eyes met hers through the veil of water. They were calm, unflinching, and impossibly familiar. Ellen's breath caught in her throat. That stance. That stillness. It reminded her of the K9s Tom used to train with, the same quiet intensity, the same watchful presence. But there was something more, something wounded. She could see it in his ribs, faintly visible, and the weary way he held himself. Pride weighed down by exhaustion. Dignity shadowed by hunger. She didn't speak. Words felt too small. Instead, she turned back inside and scraped together what she could, leftover pot roast, mashed potatoes. She carried it out and placed it just inside the gate. The dog didn't move at first. Then, cautiously, he stepped forward. Every movement was measured, like a soldier crossing enemy lines. He ate slowly, with intention, his gaze never leaving her. When he finished, he didn't linger. He turned and disappeared into the pines beyond the road, as if he had only paused to deliver a silent message. That night, Ellen couldn't sleep. The dog's eyes stayed with her, vivid even behind closed lids. She told herself he was just a stray, a lost animal blown in by the storm. But something deeper stirred in her chest, an ache that felt like memory. She left her porch light on. By morning, the rain had lifted. Gray skies gave way to soft light, filtering through swaying pines. As Ellen opened the door, heart thudding with foolish hope, she froze. There he was, sitting on the porch like he belonged there. His coat was still damp, but his posture was proud. At his side lay something wrapped in cloth. Ellen approached slowly, her breath catching. A badge. Tarnished, scratched, wrapped in what looked like the fragment of a uniform. Next to it, a tiny bundle whimpered. A puppy, fragile, trembling, its eyes barely open. Ellen dropped to her knees, her fingers brushing the badge. A name was etched into the back, James Carter. Her heart stumbled. James Carter had been Tom's last partner. Young, idealistic, and loyal to a fault. He and his K9, Valor, had vanished 5 years earlier during a mission in the Low Country. Official word was an accident. No body. No dog. No closure. But now, that same K9 sat before her, scarred by time but unmistakable. Valor. Tears welled in her eyes as she reached for the puppy. "You're safe now, little one," she whispered, her voice breaking. She looked at Valor. "You brought him here, didn't you?" He didn't answer, not with words, but his eyes held a message, one that went beyond obedience. A mission. A purpose unfinished. Inside, Ellen wrapped the puppy in warm towels, set out food, and watched as Valor settled by the fireplace. He didn't explore, didn't sniff like a dog new to the space. Instead, he laid down like he was home. That night, as the fire crackled, Ellen noticed something tied to Valor's leg. A second piece of cloth. Carefully, she untied it, revealing a plastic case. Inside, a flash drive. Her hands shook as she slid it into her old desktop computer. A folder blinked to life. It was labeled simply, "For Ellen." She clicked. A video began to play. James Carter's face appeared, older, haggard, with dirt on his uniform and fear in his eyes. "If you're watching this," he said, "Valor found you. I knew he would." The truth unraveled with each word. A covert operation. A betrayal. A high-ranking officer named Colonel Robert Vance using K-9 units to smuggle sensitive materials. Carter had uncovered it, tried to expose it, but was silenced. "If I don't make it, Valor knows where to go." Ellen watched, numb. The man who had once laughed in her kitchen was gone, but not forgotten. He had entrusted the truth not to a court, not to a reporter, but to a dog, and a woman he believed would listen. When the screen went dark, Ellen sat in silence, tears tracking down her face. Valor hadn't just come for help. He had come for justice. Outside, dawn began to paint the sky with soft gold. Inside, beside a crackling hearth, a widow, a war-scarred dog, and an orphaned pup sat at the edge of something far greater than any of them could yet name. The journey had only just begun. And the past was coming home. The air had changed. Ellen felt it the moment she stepped outside that morning. It wasn't just the thinning mist or the warm breeze rustling through the pines, it was something deeper, something stirring beneath the surface of the quiet world she had come to accept. The presence of Valor and the tiny orphan pup had cracked open a door she had long ago sealed shut. And now, it seemed, something, or someone, was about to walk through it. For the next few days, Ellen's world shifted quietly but irrevocably. She named the pup Hope. It seemed fitting. Valor, for his part, took to the role of guardian with a fierce devotion. He would not sleep unless Hope was nestled against his side. He patrolled the house as if he remembered every creak of its floorboards from another life, and sometimes, Ellen caught him staring at the edge of the woods, ears twitching, as if expecting someone, or something. One evening, as golden light spilled through the windows, Ellen sat at her desk, combing through the files James Carter had left on the flash drive. Photos. Coordinates. Scans of documents labeled confidential. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, only that the deeper she went, the more the name, Robert Vance, began to feel like the tip of a blade poised to drop. She knew she had to tell someone, but who would believe her? She was a retired librarian. A widow. And Valor, no matter how intelligent, was still a dog in the eyes of the world. James Carter had known that. That's why he'd come to her, not just for safety, but because she was invisible. Unassuming. Off the grid. And perhaps, perfect. It was on the fifth morning, just after dawn, that it happened. Ellen was filling a kettle when Valor growled. Not barked. Growled. Low, steady, and unmistakably protective. He moved to the door like a shadow, posture rigid, eyes fixed. Ellen followed, her pulse quickening. A figure was standing on the road, just outside the gate where Valor had first appeared. A man. Tall. Broad-shouldered. Wearing civilian clothes, but there was something military in his bearing, disciplined, purposeful. He didn't move toward the house, just waited, arms at his sides. Ellen stepped out onto the porch, a chill working its way through her spine despite the morning warmth. Then he raised his hand. Slowly. A salute. She blinked. Her breath caught. Something about him. "Ma'am," he called, his voice deep, hoarse. "My name is Noah Carter." Her legs nearly gave out. James Carter had no siblings. No children. At least, that's what she'd been told. But standing before her was a man in his 30s, face weathered, eyes sun-scarred, holding the unmistakable look of someone who had seen too much, lost too much, and carried it like a badge he couldn't take off. "I think you knew my father," he said. Ellen stepped off the porch, stunned. "James, was your father?" Noah nodded. "He never talked much about family. I didn't even know about you until a few weeks ago. I was, off the grid. Out of the country. When I got back, there was a letter. Instructions. Coordinates. A name." He looked down at Valor, who now stood beside Ellen like a silent sentinel. "Find Ellen Harper," Noah said. "Trust Valor. Trust no one else." Ellen led him inside. The moment he crossed the threshold, something shifted. Hope, small, trusting, bounded toward him. Noah crouched, letting her sniff his hand, then scoop into his arms. Valor watched, approving. Ellen, meanwhile, poured coffee with trembling hands. "You knew about the operation?" she asked. "I knew my father was onto something," Noah said. He was scared. Not for himself, but for Valor. For the evidence. "I thought he was just being paranoid." Then he vanished. No body. No answers. I didn't even get a memorial. Just silence. Ellen slid the flash drive across the table. He wasn't paranoid. For the next hour, they pored over the data. James had been meticulous. Notes, names, dates. Bank transfers. Shipments of military-grade equipment rerouted through phantom suppliers. And at the center of it all, Colonel Robert Vance. Retired now. Living somewhere in Northern Virginia. A decorated war hero. Untouchable. But not invisible. He thought no one would come looking, Noah said, his voice low with quiet fury. He didn't count on Valor surviving. Ellen looked at the dog, who sat quietly at the door, ears twitching as if still listening to ghosts. And he didn't count on you returning. Noah's gaze met hers. This isn't just about my father anymore. He was right. By sunset, the decision had been made. The house was no longer just a haven, it was a base. Ellen retrieved her old notebooks, maps, burner phone. She had helped Tom decode classified files before, he used to call her his quiet analyst. Now, she would be that again. Valor had returned not just to deliver truth, but to gather allies. And the journey was no longer his alone. As the stars wheeled overhead, and the woods held their breath, Ellen, Noah, Valor, and Tiny Hope stood at the threshold of something vast, dangerous, and inevitable. The past had returned, not to haunt them, but to be answered. The call had been heard. And this time, they would answer together. The silence of the forest no longer felt peaceful. It had weight now, like something unseen was watching, listening. Ellen felt it every time she opened her laptop, every time she traced a red line on her hand-drawn map, every time Noah's fingers hovered over his father's files. Even Valor, once content to sleep near the hearth or patrol the porch, was restless. He moved like a soldier on duty. Always alert. Always circling. As if waiting for a threat that had yet to declare itself. But perhaps the threat had always been there. Noah had found something, a reference buried deep in an encrypted folder James had named Requiem. It wasn't a document or a video. It was a GPS coordinate. Ellen cross-referenced it with old land records and satellite data. The location was isolated, deep in the Adirondack woods, near an abandoned Cold War-era comms outpost that was supposedly decommissioned in the late 80s. But the metadata told another story. There had been activity, unlogged drones, unregistered supply drops, low-orbit satellite scans that didn't belong to any public or military catalog. Someone had been watching that spot. Recently. And often. Whatever was buried there, someone didn't want it found. At dawn, they packed light, gear, notebooks, a secure hard drive, and a small drone for recon. Hope stayed behind with Mrs. Keller, the neighbor who believed Ellen was simply writing a novel about war dogs and fallen spies. It was a lie Ellen regretted, but safety now demanded secrecy. They reached the trailhead by midday, where the road turned to gravel and the gravel vanished into moss-covered stone. The deeper they went, the less the forest felt like a sanctuary. Pines closed in above them, swallowing light. Valor led the way, his paws soundless against the earth, his nose twitching at intervals. And always ahead, that single red dot blinking on Noah's tablet, steadily guiding them toward something James had wanted them to find. After 4 hours of hiking, they found the bunker. Half submerged in earth and roots, the concrete structure looked like a forgotten ruin. But the reinforced door was clean. No rust. No decay. Someone had been here. Recently. Noah approached slowly, eyes scanning, fingers grazing the keypad mounted beside the entrance. It was dead. No power. But Valor, after a moment of hesitation, padded forward and nudged a stone at the door's base. Beneath it was a small access panel, wired directly into the lock. Dad must have installed this after he left the military, Noah murmured. Redundant entry. In case. He didn't finish the sentence. It took Ellen 15 minutes to reroute the circuit manually. A soft click, then a hiss. The door opened, revealing darkness that smelled of oil, metal, and time. Inside, the air was cold. The walls lined with rusted racks of equipment. Old maps. Shelves of classified documents. Some were labeled Project Rook. Others were marked Lazarus Protocol. Most were stamped with symbols that didn't match any known U.S. agency. Not CIA. Not DARPA. Something else. Something older. And in the center of the bunker, under a plastic tarp, was a steel crate. It took both of them to lift the lid. Inside were hard drives. Not one or two, but dozens, carefully labeled with coordinates, military operation codes, dates spanning over 2 decades. There were tapes, too, analog, encrypted. Old surveillance footage. Reports written in codes that Ellen hadn't seen since Tom's final deployment. And beneath it all, wrapped in cloth, was a journal. James Carter's handwriting. They sat in silence and read. Page after page. The story it told was not of heroism, but of betrayal. Robert Vance had been part of a covert program during the Gulf War, Project Rook. Officially, it never existed. Unofficially, it was the breeding ground for bio-enhanced animals and cognitive warfare tools, training dogs like Valor not just for combat, but for strategy, espionage, and near-human understanding. James had been a handler. A believer. He had helped Valor escape when the project was shut down, not because of ethics, but because it had worked too well. Valor and others like him had developed behaviors and comprehension levels that frightened their creators. When the Pentagon refused to decommission them, Vance took matters into his own hands, eliminating the handlers, destroying the labs, and erasing all traces of Project Rook. But James had survived. He'd gone dark. Raised Noah in silence. Carried the burden for decades. Until someone found him again. The truth crashed through Ellen's chest like thunder. Valor wasn't just a relic of a failed experiment, he was proof. He remembered. He understood. He had returned to finish what James could not. A faint beeping sound snapped them back to the present. Noah checked his tablet. A drone. Nearby. Closing in. We need to move, he said. Ellen grabbed the journal, the hard drives, the tapes. Valor was already at the door, tail rigid, nose in the wind. They left the bunker just as the first shadow passed overhead. The drone, black, silent, unfamiliar, hovered for 3 seconds before vanishing back into the trees. Someone knew. Someone had followed. They reached the jeep before nightfall, breath ragged, hearts pounding. But the data was safe. For now. Back at the cabin, they sealed the bunker evidence in a false wall behind the fireplace. Ellen felt the weight of every page, every whispered word James had recorded. She thought of Tom. Of the silence he'd carried. Of the calls in the night he never explained. And then, late into the night, while Valor lay watching the door and Noah drifted into exhausted sleep on the couch, Ellen opened one last file from the drive. It was a video. Dated 2 days before James disappeared. His face appeared, older, gaunt, eyes haunted. "If you're watching this," he said, "then they've found me. And they'll come for Valor next. Don't trust anyone. Especially Vance. He's not done. Project Rook was never shut down." It went dark. He paused, and something shifted in his expression, softening. "I kept one more secret. Something I couldn't write down. If you want the truth, you'll have to go to the farm." The screen went black. Ellen sat in the silence that followed, trembling. The past hadn't just returned. It had never really left. And now, it was calling them deeper. The following morning dawned heavy and gray, the kind of sky that felt like it had been holding its breath for centuries. Mist clung to the treetops, and the distant cry of a hawk echoed like a warning. Ellen sat at the kitchen table, James's journal spread open beside her laptop, while Noah brewed coffee in silence. Neither of them had slept much. Valor hadn't moved from the threshold, eyes fixed on the forest beyond the cabin like he expected something, or someone, to appear from the shadows. The word farm had lingered in her mind all night like a riddle. Ellen had tried dozens of searches, poring through old military jargon, James's files, and declassified project documents. But it wasn't until Noah, scanning a faded photograph tucked into the back of the journal, pointed out a worn patch on James's uniform, FRM Station 8, that something clicked. It wasn't a farm. It was an acronym. Facility for Remote Monitoring. Station 8 had been one of a handful of black sites used during the tail end of Project Rook's operation, officially dismantled in 1993. But James's records said otherwise. Satellite images from the last 6 months showed signs of activity. Trucks. Heat signatures. A possible underground power source. They had a new destination. But before they could leave, Ellen needed backup. Not agents. Not law enforcement. She needed someone who had once walked the same tightrope she now faced, someone who had chased buried secrets through a landscape of lies. So she made a call to the only person she still trusted from her former life, Marco DeWitt. A retired cryptologist turned underground whistleblower, Marco had been in hiding since 2017 after exposing a Pentagon surveillance loophole that could have put half the intelligence community behind bars. He didn't pick up the call, but 12 minutes later, a message blinked on Ellen's screen. Coordinates received. Meet me at 46.2311 degrees north, 74.5122 degrees west. Burn after reading. 2 days later, under cover of dawn, they met him in a derelict ranger outpost deep in the forest, disguised as a backcountry weather station. Marco hadn't changed much, grizzled, wiry, suspicious of everything. But his eyes softened when he saw Ellen. "I figured one day you'd come knocking with something that made my last scandal look like child's play," he muttered, eyeing the USB she slid across the table. "So what's the play now, Carter's ghost calling for backup from beyond the grave?" Ellen didn't smile. "Something worse. The program never ended. And now it's evolving." He plugged in a USB and scanned through the data like a surgeon identifying a disease under a microscope. When he paused, it wasn't because he didn't understand. It was because he did. "You're not dealing with a black site," Marco said at last. "You're dealing with an autonomous cell. A fragment of the machine that went rogue. No oversight. No accountability. And it's not about the dogs anymore." He turned his screen toward them. A network of connections, personnel files, corporate shells, former operatives listed as Kia but now tied to private security firms with ambiguous contracts. Whatever Station 8 is now, it's private, funded, and armed. They planned their approach carefully. That night, while Marco worked to crack the security firewalls around the station's hidden uplinks, Noah and Ellen pored over every scrap of intel James had left behind. Ellen found a note, scribbled hastily in the margin of one log. "He's not just trying to erase Rook, he's trying to rewrite it." They didn't know yet what it meant. But the implications were terrifying. The next morning, they moved out. Station 8 lay buried in a narrow gorge 2 counties east. Valor rode in the back, unusually quiet, as if he recognized the terrain. The last leg of the journey had to be on foot. The closer they got, the more signs of surveillance appeared. Motion sensors hidden in trees. Infrared tripwires that could only be spotted at oblique angles. Drone nests disguised as rotting birdhouses. But they weren't just relying on old tech. As they approached the ridgeline overlooking the gorge, they spotted something that made Ellen's blood run cold: 2 canines, jet black and unnaturally still, patrolling the perimeter. "Are those?" Noah whispered. Ellen nodded, stunned. "They're Rook units. But not like Valor. They moved with perfect symmetry. No hesitation. Their eyes glowed faintly, a faint neural sync indicator. These weren't field dogs. These were combat AI hybrids. Somewhere between biology and machine. The continuation of a program that should have never been allowed to exist. They pulled back and set up a recon station 2 miles north, in a cave Marco had mapped years ago. There, they established a data tunnel into Station 8's internal network, using a long-range antenna rigged through layers of proxy relays. It took Marco 2 hours to get a stable connection, but once he did, the truth came pouring out. Inside Station 8 was the Reclamation Initiative. A new phase of Project Rook, designed not to train animals, but to digitize their neural architecture. To replicate their intuition. Their loyalty. Their fearlessness. Into autonomous units. Combat drones. Civilian monitoring bots. Even social control systems. They weren't just weaponizing dogs. They were trying to replace them. James had tried to shut it down when he discovered its existence, but he'd been too late. Vance had privatized it. And now, backed by shadow capital and mercenary scientists, he was pushing toward launch. And the final piece, the neural core interface, was missing. Until Valor came back. Ellen stared at the last decrypted message from inside the station. Target number 7 reactivated. Retrieval window open. They weren't just watching. They were coming. Outside, the wind howled through the trees. In the shadows, something moved, silent, deliberate, patient. The investigation had begun. But the hunt had, too. And now, Ellen knew with terrifying clarity. They had to go deeper. Not just to expose the truth. But to stop it. Before it evolved beyond anyone's control. The forest around the recon cave whispered with an ominous stillness, as if the very trees were holding their breath in anticipation. Ellen tightened the straps on her backpack and glanced at Noah, who was meticulously checking the gear: thermal scopes, EMP grenades, comm scramblers, all scavenged and improvised but enough for what lay ahead. Valor sat quietly nearby, alert but calm, his gaze shifting between the shadows and their small fire. The journey to Station 8 was not just a physical trek but a descent into a realm where every step was weighted with unseen menace. The faint hum of drone engines, hidden cameras blinking in unnatural cadence, and the eerie silence between distant mechanical growls reminded them that this was no ordinary black site anymore. This was a fortress, alive with technology that blurred the line between predator and prey. Ellen's mind flashed back to James's final entry, the urgency bleeding from each word. If you're reading this, trust no one. The enemy wears many faces. Even the familiar. The implication haunted her: had their own allies already been compromised? Was Marco's sudden reappearance too convenient? The thought tightened like a vice, but she pushed it down. There was no room for doubt now. Under the cover of a dense, moonless night, they moved, silent phantoms threading through underbrush, avoiding the laser tripwires and pressure sensors that littered the perimeter like teeth in a trap. Valor's senses were unmatched. He paused, then darted ahead, tail low, guiding them through a narrow ravine that avoided the main patrol routes. Their breaths came shallow, hearts pounding in synchronized rhythms with the quiet rustle of leaves. When they reached the edge of Station 8, the site revealed itself, an immense concrete complex, partially embedded into the rocky hillside, with vents hissing steam into the cold air and surveillance turrets scanning methodically. The architecture was brutal, designed to intimidate and erase hope. It was a mausoleum for the ghosts of forgotten experiments, but it pulsed with a dangerous vitality. Ellen scanned the security layout on her tablet. The main entrance was impossible to breach without triggering alarms. But a maintenance tunnel, half-collapsed and shielded by decades of overgrowth, offered a sliver of opportunity. Marco nodded. "That's our way in. It leads straight to the underground network, close enough to the core." They scrambled down the narrow passage, the walls damp and claustrophobic. The air grew thick with the metallic scent of rust and something else, ozone. Electrical charge. Ellen's skin prickled with unease. Every echo of their footsteps was amplified, every breath a potential alarm. Suddenly, a sharp mechanical click. Noah froze, fingers clutching a crowbar. From the shadows ahead, two pairs of glowing red eyes emerged, sleek, unnerving, their forms a fusion of muscle and machinery. The Rook combat hybrids. Valor growled low, his own eyes flashing cobalt blue in response, but even he hesitated against these new predators. The hybrids moved with terrifying precision, silent as the void, coordinated as a single organism. Ellen dove to the side, feeling the rush of air as one lunged past her. Noah slammed the crowbar into the exposed circuitry of another, sparks flying, but the creatures barely faltered, adapting instantly. "Grenades!" Ellen hissed, pulling a small EMP from her belt. She lobbed it into the cluster. The pulse detonated with a silent wave, and the hybrids convulsed, systems rebooting mid-stride. They staggered, then snapped back to lethal alertness. "Move!" Noah shouted, grabbing Ellen's arm. They bolted deeper into the tunnel. The narrow passage opened into a sprawling subterranean chamber, buzzing with flickering consoles and dormant machinery. Here, the air was colder, the hum of the station's power core vibrating through the floor. Ellen's heart thudded painfully, knowing they were just steps away from the truth James had warned about. But danger was relentless. From a side corridor, automated turrets activated with a shrill beep, tracking their movement with deadly intent. Noah dove behind a console, firing his rifle in bursts that echoed like thunder in the cavernous room. Ellen sprinted toward a control panel, fingers flying over the keys to override the security lockdown. Her vision tunneled. The walls seemed to close in. Suddenly, a voice, calm, cold, utterly inhuman, echoed through the chamber's speakers. "Unauthorized personnel detected. Initiating containment protocol." The lights flickered and dimmed, replaced by an oppressive crimson glow. Steel shutters began to descend from the ceiling, sealing exits. They were trapped. "Noah, we have to find the core. That's where the control is. If we can shut it down, we stop the entire operation," Ellen shouted. Valor leapt forward, breaking through the nearest shutter with brute force, and the team slipped into a tight corridor lined with humming data banks. Deeper and deeper they went, the walls pulsing with eerie bioluminescent wiring that writhed like living veins. The station was a living labyrinth, designed to disorient and consume. Every corner brought new threats, motion sensors triggering floor spikes, automated defense drones patrolling tight spaces, and worst of all, the growing suspicion that something inside was watching them, an intelligence born not of flesh, but of circuits and code, cold and relentless. Hours seemed to pass as minutes. Exhaustion clawed at their resolve, but Ellen's determination burned brighter with every obstacle. James's voice echoed in her mind, a tether to the man who had sacrificed everything to warn them. At last, they reached a cavernous chamber where the neural core interface was housed, a massive crystalline structure pulsing with data streams, surrounded by containment fields and guarded by the deadliest of all threats, an AI-driven sentinel, half machine, half beast, whose glowing eyes tracked every heartbeat. The battle was inevitable. As Valor lunged, teeth bared and cybernetic enhancements whirring, Ellen prepared for the fight that would decide the fate of not just the station, but the future of the Rook program, and all that it had become. The hero's path was no longer about survival. It was about sacrifice. The chamber pulsed like a living heart, massive, circular, lined with mirrored panels and veins of glowing circuitry that spread across the walls like neural pathways. At its center, encased in a shimmering containment field, stood the neural core. Behind it loomed the sentinel, 12 feet of fused metal and flesh, its form vaguely humanoid but distorted, with elongated limbs, spines of alloyed bone, and a singular, burning eye like a molten star. Ellen stood frozen for a heartbeat, adrenaline surging through her veins. Beside her, Noah steadied his rifle, sweat streaking down his soot-covered face. Valor, bleeding from a gash along his ribcage, crouched low with a growl, his synthetic enhancements flickering like static. The sentinel took a single step forward, and the ground trembled. Ellen's mind reeled. This thing was not just a guardian. It was an apex predator of artificial evolution, forged not only to kill but to understand, to learn, to adapt, to become invincible. "This is it," Noah whispered. "Either we end it here, or no one else ever gets the chance." The containment field dropped with a hiss, and the sentinel launched. What followed was not just a battle, it was war in microcosm, the raw clash of will, memory, and sacrifice. Noah opened fire, each shot a roar in the vast chamber. The bullets ricocheted harmlessly off the sentinel's reactive armor. It twisted unnaturally, pivoting midair, and slammed into him with a bone-crushing blow that hurled him across the room like a ragdoll. Ellen ran, sliding behind a console. Sparks flew as the sentinel's claws tore through the metal. She activated a secondary EMP, small, limited, but enough to stagger it for a breath. In that moment, Valor sprang. The hybrid wolf collided with the sentinel in mid-stride, teeth sinking into its shoulder. Circuits flared and sputtered. The sentinel screeched, a sound that was neither beast nor machine, and slammed Valor into the ground. The floor cracked beneath the impact. Ellen screamed, scrambling toward him, but Valor stirred, hurt but alive. Still fighting. She had seconds. Maybe less. Ellen dashed to the core's terminal. Streams of data scrolled by faster than thought, code layered in encryption that twisted and reformed like a living maze. But this was what she had prepared for. Every breadcrumb James had left. Every sacrifice. She input the override codes. 1. 2. The third failed. A distorted voice echoed through the chamber, a female voice, haunting, familiar. "Ellen, you shouldn't have come." Ellen froze. The voice was hers. The AI had mirrored her. It had built its final firewall using her psychological imprint. Her voice. Her choices. Her own deepest fears. "I have to come," she whispered. "Because you're wrong. This doesn't end with control. It ends with freedom." The sentinel rose again, limping, missing half its left arm. But it kept coming. A relentless monstrosity driven by the core's directive, preserve itself at all costs. Noah dragged himself upright, blood in his mouth, his left arm dangling uselessly. "Ellen, now, do it." She reached the manual override, a fist-sized kill switch deep beneath the terminal. But it was biometric. Only James could activate it. Unless. She pulled the locket from around her neck. James's DNA was embedded in the photograph, hair, skin, time-worn traces of life. She placed it on the scanner. The system hesitated. Confirmed. The core howled, a high-pitched scream of unraveling logic, and began to collapse in on itself. The light strobed, and the sentinel stopped mid-step, twitching as though caught in a seizure. Its eye dimmed, then went dark. Silence fell. Then the entire station shuddered. Self-destruct protocols initiated. Of course. It had been designed not just to protect itself, but to destroy everything if breached. "We have to go," Ellen screamed. She hauled Noah to his feet, and Valor limped behind, blood trailing from his side. They sprinted back through the shattered corridors, dodging falling debris and collapsing walls. Fires bloomed from broken conduits. The ceiling cracked like eggshell. Minutes stretched like hours. They barely made it through the emergency hatch before the station behind them erupted in a thunderous, subterranean blast, sending a column of fire into the night sky. The earth shook, and the mountain groaned as the station crumbled into itself, buried forever. Ellen, Noah, and Valor collapsed in the tall grass overlooking the valley, lungs burning, hearts pounding. The night was quiet again. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime. No one spoke for a long while. They just lay there, staring at the stars, which blinked softly above the smoke. Ellen reached into her pocket and pulled out the locket, miraculously intact. "Thank you, James," she whispered. And the wind carried her words into the dark. This wasn't just the end of the mission. It was the end of the past. And the beginning of something entirely new. The hero had returned, scarred but alive, bearing not treasure, but truth. And the world would never be the same. The smoke from the explosion drifted slowly over the horizon, mingling with the morning mist as dawn painted the sky in quiet hues of lavender and gold. The forest was eerily still, nature itself stunned by the violence that had torn through the mountains hours before. From the hilltop, Ellen stood motionless, her arms wrapped around herself, watching the last tendrils of black disappear into the wind. Behind her, Noah sat on a fallen log, one arm in a sling, staring into the distance, while Valor rested at his feet, eyes half closed but ears alert, ever vigilant. The mountain had swallowed Station 8, and with it, a chapter of horror, secrecy, and sacrifice. Yet the emptiness left behind was not victory, it was a void. And within it, the weight of everything they had lost, and everything they had learned. For hours, no one spoke. Later, in the ruins of a nearby village long abandoned, they found refuge in a crumbling chapel. Its stained glass windows were cracked, the pews covered in dust, but the silence there was sacred. Ellen lit a candle, not out of ritual, but remembrance, and placed the locket on the altar. "I thought I came to uncover the truth," she said softly, voice trembling, "but I think I was always searching for peace." Noah looked up. "You found it?" She shook her head. "Not yet. But I think I know where to start." Valor let out a soft huff, and nudged her hand with his nose. She smiled faintly. The following days were filled with long walks, quiet meals by firelight, and shared stories that finally peeled back layers of silence. Ellen read through James's recovered journal in full, his notes, his guilt, his fear, and, above all, his hope that someone would finish what he could not. They sent encrypted messages to allies across the globe, whistleblowers, journalists, or survivors who had vanished into the margins of society. One by one, messages returned. People were listening. People were ready. The collapse of Station 8 had triggered ripples across the hidden world. Ellen and Noah traveled to Geneva, using James's final contact, a woman named Amara who had once been a cyber-ethicist, turned into a ghost after exposing a corrupted UN committee. Amara embraced Ellen like a sister lost to war, and for the first time in years, Ellen cried. Fully. Freely. They formed a council, not of power, but of memory. Survivors. Witnesses. Those who had seen the edge of the abyss and refused to step back in. Ellen gave her first testimony weeks later at a secret tribunal organized by a coalition of watchdogs and rogue states. Her words were calm, measured, but inside them burned the fire of someone who had walked through the underworld and emerged with ash in her lungs and truth in her hands. "I don't ask for vengeance," she said. "I ask for transparency. For accountability. For names to be remembered, and for secrets to be laid bare, not to destroy, but to heal." The footage went viral within hours. It was never meant to, but the world was ready. Protests broke out in cities long silenced. Whistleblowers stepped out of the shadows. The term "neural purge" became a rallying cry. And slowly, methodically, the system began to crack, not from force, but from light seeping through every fracture. But none of that mattered more than the moment Ellen returned to James's old cabin in the mountains, now overgrown with moss and silence. She stepped inside, trailing her fingers across the woodwork he had once built with his own hands. A storm rumbled in the distance. Rain began to fall. She sat on the floor and opened a weathered envelope. Inside was a letter. Unread until now. "Ellen. If you're reading this, then somehow you survived the thing I couldn't. I knew you would, you always had more strength than me. I made too many mistakes. I thought I could control something born from chaos. I lied to you, not because I stopped loving you, but because I didn't know how to face what I had become. But you were always the compass. The north I lost. I hope one day, after all this, you'll forgive me. And that you'll live, not haunted, but free. James." The rain masked her tears, but she didn't wipe them away. She let them fall. Each one a release, not of pain, but of love, of longing, and finally, acceptance. She buried the locket beside the cabin, under a tree he once carved their initials into. Valor sat beside her, head bowed, the wind tugging gently at their clothes. As the clouds broke and a sliver of sun pierced through the gray, Ellen whispered, "I forgive you." And in that single breath, the hero returned home, not in triumph, but in truth. Not to reclaim what was lost, but to begin anew. Some stories end in glory. Others in tragedy. But the truest ones? They end in peace.